But let's talk about, first of all, how Christianity has come down to us. Just give us a quick outline. We're going to keep coming back to this, but so people that haven't even heard this before, how did it come down? Start with Jesus and work down toward through history.
In the beginning, there was Jesus. Let's start there. And he went around and he ministered with the 12, the apostles. Part of the reason he ministered with and picked out 12 was so that some of the people around him would be very, very familiar with what his ministry was all about, because he was well aware, not long into his ministry, that he was likely headed to death, to die, and he was going to be crucified, he was going to be removed from the scene, and whatever he represented would have to be picked up and carried on. The baton would have to be passed to these 12. Then from the 12, we have writings either that they're directly responsible for or people around them are responsible for. If we look at our 4 Gospels, we've got Matthew and John that go back in each case to one of these 12. Or we've got Mark and Luke that go back, in the case of Mark, probably to Peter in his circle. In the case of Luke, to Paul in his circle. And Luke probably was well circulated, knew many of these 12. So we've got these apostolic roots, but there's a practical problem. And that is, even though these Gospels were produced in the latter part of the 1st century, somewhere between 50 and 90 A.D., they weren't functioning in the way we think of the Bible until at least the end of the 2nd century. That we know. Individual books may have been cited and engaged, but they weren't working like the 4 Gospels like we think about today. So then the question becomes, how do we know that this stuff is true? And more importantly, before these books were being circulated so that people would know what the truth is, how did Christians know what to believe? Well, we know that from the little bits of material in our best historical sources, which are in these books, these little traditions that were passed on in memorable form, hymns that were sung so that theology would be remembered through singing, and rites that the church participated in, like the Lord's table, in which you reviewed the death of Jesus every time you went to the table. So these things allowed the basic core of orthodoxy to be affirmed to people who, by the way, normally you didn't have books in this period. Everything that you did, if you were an average person on the street, would normally have been done orally. You would have heard it.
Yeah. Let me see if I can frame it in Ankerberg terms here, and you correct me, okay? Today, we have alternative Christianities today. Everybody knows the Mormon Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, okay? The Mormon Church says Jesus was a God, the Holy Spirit was another God, and the Father was a third God. No, by the way, if you join the Mormon Church and follow their ways, you can become a God too, okay? And they had extra texts that they would point to. We as Christians, we want to say, if you want to refute that, you say, we got this New Testament, okay? You point to a verse. Jehovah's Witnesses, they subtract from the New Testament, okay? Jesus is not a God. He's something in between God and man, okay? And they have to subtract verses from the New Testament. Now, Christians use the New Testament and the Old Testament to talk to them. Now, take the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and go back into the first 200 years of Christianity when you had no New Testament. What you're saying is, what did the people point to? How would they say, if you got another Jesus, you got another God, how in the world would those people, without a Bible, how would they talk to somebody? And what you're saying is, you start with the 12. You got Jesus, who makes his own declarations. And the 12 that are around him, the people saw the 12. I mean, they lived with him and walked with him for 3 years. The fact is, then Jesus passes off the scene, and you got these disciples, these apostles preaching. And they're founding churches, and people knew what they said. And then you got the disciples of the apostles, and they're writing. And so you've got these historical links that the new religious people, they would sell their grandmother to get this kind of evidence if our students are listening right here. They don't have this kind of evidence.
Exactly right.
But we've got this kind of evidence, and it does go back. But you're saying it didn't come out in a book. The 27 books of the New Testament didn't come out in a package. Those were letters. Each one of those were independent witnesses that were sent to congregations or to people. And they influenced those people. They were read out loud. This was not secret stuff. This was out loud stuff.
That's right. It's for the public.
And so that was the corrective, and that was what people were talking about. Take it from there now.
Well, basically, within those pieces that are being read in the churches, which are long. I mean, it takes a long time to go through the Gospel of Matthew or the Gospel of Luke. But and even to go through the letters of Paul, you know, That would take a while to listen. But embedded within them are pieces of traditional material. This is stuff that was passed on orally. These would be 1 or 2 verse bits of material, real small, real memorable, laid out in parallelism so that you could remember it, repeated over and over and over so you would remember it. It's a lot like memory verses today. You know how sometimes we give people memory verses. If you'll remember these 2 things, you'll have at least a start on this topic. That's exactly what's going on, except it's going on orally. There isn't a Bible to point to do it. It's just simply, this is what we've passed on because we're coming out of a Jewish culture, and Jewish culture honored the oral word and the tradition.